everybody. Welcome back to WorldComEDU Easy-Story-House series. My name is Brian Stuart, and in this series we're taking a look at a group storytelling project. This is a unique type of project in that each student will take just part of a story and they will read it out loud, or they will remember it and say it from memory. Wow, very good skill. Of course, we take all these parts and we put them together to retell one of these stories. And of course, these stories are taken from a group of 25 world-famous English stories. Of course, maybe they weren't originally written in English, but of course they were translated into English, and they become famous throughout the centuries as English stories. In this case, we're taking a look at The Princess and the Pea, written by Hans Christian Andersen a long time ago. Now this, of course, he's a very famous author of children's stories, and he has many famous stories, not just as books, but also that have been turned into movies and are the basis of many movies. In this case, this is an interesting story. It's a little bit long, but it's very good practice for the students to read, because they are exposed to a lot of good vocabulary and a lot of good expressions in English. And of course, it's a very interesting story. There are some interesting characters that they meet on the way and some interesting situations. The moral of this story, of course, is that you shouldn't judge other people by their appearance, and you shouldn't just jump to conclusions without any evidence. So that's kind of what the main theme of this story is. Of course, it's kind of a longer story. There are many other ideas or themes to think about in this story, but it's a very good story. It's world famous, and many children remember this story when they were growing up, if they were growing up in an English education background. So it's a good story overall. So why don't you join me and the kids as they read the story. Let's listen and let's support them as they read and learn. Okay, let's take a look.
Page 2. Once upon a time, there lived a young prince. He wanted to marry a princess. His parents wanted him to get married too. But he was very picky. He met many princesses, however, he didn't like any of them. He always found something wrong with them. They were either too this or too that. She's too smart, she's too shy, she's too loud, the prince would complain. None of the princesses pleased him. The king and queen very worried. They were afraid the prince would never marry. The king was furious and said to him one day, "My son, this cannot go on. You really must get married soon. I am going to hold a grand ball. I will invite all the princes from the neighboring kingdoms. I'm sure you will like one of them." For several days, the palace was busy with activity. Everyone was preparing for the big party. The servants polished and cleaned the palace until it sparkled. The cooks made a delicious feast, and the magician protected their music for the ball.
Page 5. Finally, the evening of the grand ball came. The guests began to arrive in handsome carriages. They were all dressed in their finest clothes. The princess put on their most beautiful dress. They were made from silk and velvet with gold and silver trim. The princess covered themselves in rich jewels. To anyone else, they all looked wonderful, but the prince stood alone in a corner. He just frowned at the crowd. The queen was watching the prince all night long. She became angry and said, "You must make an effort, my son. Ask one of the princes to dance with you." The prince didn't want to upset his mother, so he started to dance with the princess. Each time the prince changed partners, the queen whispered to him, "So what about this one?" But the prince wasn't pleased with any of them. He would answer, "Too tall, too small, too talkative, too quiet, too ugly, too vain, too thin, too fat." Soon the clock struck midnight and it was time for the ball to end. The guests started to leave one by one. The king and queen were very upset. The prince didn't like any of the princess. He couldn't find anyone he wanted to marry. The king didn't understand why the prince was so picky. He asked, "Didn't you like even one of them? I thought several of the princesses were very lovely." The prince just shook his head. He was quite depressed, and both the king and queen were ready to give up.
Page 8. Meanwhile, in a kingdom far away, another ball was just ending. The guests were leaving, and a princess was frowning in a corner because her parents were scolding her. "You wouldn't dance and you wouldn't look at any of the princes," cried the king. "You are so picky that I'm afraid you'll never get married." But the princess said, "The princes were all too tall or too short, too fat or too thin, too vain or too ugly. I won't marry any one of them." The king and queen were very upset. They wanted their daughter to be happy, but they also wanted her to be married. Suddenly, the princess said, "Maybe the husband for me lives in another country. Let me go and visit some faraway kingdoms, I beg you." At first, the king and queen refused. It would be too dangerous for a young and beautiful princess to travel alone, and they could not go with her. But their daughter was stubborn. She wouldn't stop begging, so they eventually gave in. A few days later, the princess left the palace to look for her prince. She wasn't alone, though she was escorted by armed guards. They traveled through many kingdoms. The princess was welcomed at every palace. She met many princes, but she didn't want to marry any of them. She just couldn't find her perfect prince. The princess didn't want to disappoint her parents, so she kept on looking. Page 11. One night, the princess and her guards were passing through a dark forest. Then suddenly, a band of robbers appeared. They attacked the robbers. They captured all the guards and stole their baggage and gold. The princess ran and hid behind a tree. The robbers searched for her for hours, but finally gave up. Luckily, she managed to escape. But now, the princess was lost and alone in the dark woods. She walked for hours. She tore her clothes on branches and lost her shoes in the mud. The princess was about to lose hope.
Then, at last, she saw a castle in the distance. She began to run toward it. Suddenly, there was a terrible crash of thunder. Rain began to pour down. By the time the princess reached the castle, she was soaking wet. The princess knocked on the door of the castle. The castle was the home of the picky young prince. The servants opened the door. They were surprised to see a dirty, wet woman standing at the door. "Take me to your master," commanded the princess. She looked a mess, but the young woman's manner was very proud, and her voice was clear and noble. Instead of closing the door on her, they let her in and called for their master. The king and queen were shocked to see such a dirty creature. But the princess calmly asked for their help. "My men and I were attacked by robbers. Only I escaped. I asked for your help." The king and queen were surprised by her noble voice and manner. The queen gave her some dry clothes. The princess sat by the fire to warm herself. She told them who she was and about the ark. The king and queen couldn't believe that a young princess was traveling all alone. They thought that maybe she was lying. Maybe this young woman was really a fortune hunter. They wanted to ask her more questions, but then the prince came in. When he saw the princess, he was immediately charmed. He thought she was beautiful, not too tall and not too short. The princess thought the prince was very handsome, not too thin and not too fat.
The king and queen saw how their son looked at the young woman. He stared at her with such sweetness, the king and queen began to feel worried. "Come, my dear, let me show you around the castle," said the king quickly. When they left, the prince turned to his mother and cried, "She's the one! What do you mean, my son?" asked the queen. "I want to marry her," said the prince. The queen sighed and said to him seriously, "You must marry a princess. We know nothing about this young woman. You can't just believe her because she says her father is a king." The prince begged, "Mother, you must find a way to prove that she is a real princess. If she is not, I will die of a broken heart." The queen thought for a while. She then went to a bedroom. The bedroom was for the young woman to sleep in. She carefully looked at the bed. She didn't want anyone watching. So she checked the hallway. When she was sure that no one was looking, she slid something under the mattress. After the princess saw everything in the palace, she was very tired. Smiling sweetly at the prince, she said goodnight and went to her room. The room was pretty and the bed looked cozy and warm. The princess quickly climbed into bed, but when she lay down, she felt something poking her. "I can't sleep," she said. Sighed. "Wherever I lie, I can't get comfortable," and she stayed awake all night. Early in the morning, she went down to breakfast. She looked more tired than the night before. The queen looked at her suspiciously. "Did you sleep well, my dear?" she asked. "Oh, terribly," said the princess. "A terrible lump in the bed kept me awake." "Oh, I am so sorry. I will see to it right away," promised the queen. During the day, the princess felt better. She even went riding with the prince. They felt so happy together. They hardly need to speak. They know what the other was thinking just by looking at each other. They were a perfect couple.
That evening, the young man was sure he was loved with the princess. He was anxious to know, was she a princess or wasn't she? "So, can you prove that our guest is really a princess?" he asked his mother. "She is definitely from a good family," said his mother, "but I am still not sure that she is a princess. Wait a little longer." Night came and the princess went to her bedroom. She found that the queen had kindly put extra mattresses on her bed. "I am sure to sleep well tonight," she thought. She quickly climbed into bed, but once again she was uncomfortable. Something was poking her. The servants and they added first one mattress, then another and another. Finally, the servants used all the extra mattresses in the palace. The princess spent the night on top of 7 mattresses, but she still couldn't get to sleep. When the princess did not come down to breakfast the next morning, the king, the queen, and the prince were worried. They went to her room. They found the poor princess on the floor with 7 mattresses all around her. The princess
looked very unhappy and tired. The queen decided she has enough proof. She put her hand under the bottom mattress and she took out a pea. Only a princess can feel a pea through 7 mattresses, she declared. The prince was delighted. The happy prince asked the princess to marry him. She agreed at once. The princess' parents blessed their marriage. The happy couple had a big, beautiful wedding. Everyone from both kingdoms came to celebrate. After the wedding, the prince and princess kept the pea in a crystal case. Every time they looked at it, they reminded of the first meeting from then on. The picky prince and princess lived happily ever after.